So I'm going to try to be as mature and as professional as I can when I say this. Size does matter. You can see in front of me, I got some big bottles. And today I want to talk about size and why it's important when you pick a sparkling wine. I'm Darryl, your champagne expert. Let's get bubbly. So we're gonna do something a little bit different today because I'm not gonna actually drink champagne. So you can see here now, I've got some of the big bottles and their standard size bottles as comparison. These are what we call Magnums. These are 1.7 liters, or essentially 2 bottles of the standard size bottles, which is a 750 milliliter. Why, aside from the aesthetics, because don't get me wrong, the big bottles, they really do look beautiful. So the Magnums have been around since the 1800s. Since its inception, the Magnum has been considered the perfect size bottle. And there's a bit of science to it, and there's some aesthetic to it, and there's some logic to it, and there's a little bit of, I don't want to use the word mysticism to it, but a little bit of just, a little bit of history to it and a little bit of romanticism about it. So what is one of the more scientific reasons? After we degorge our bottles, when we remove those dead yeast cells, inevitably some of the champagne comes out in the process. And that's when we move into a phase called dosage, where we add a little bit of liquor back into the bottle to even it out, to fill the bottle up. The air gap is the same. And as we all know from our basic science, oxygen has a bad habit of ruining things. So we want to limit the amount of oxygen that comes in contact with our sparkling wines. And the least amount of oxygen, the better. When we get into the Magnums, that is just the right amount of oxygen to the volume of champagne to make this the absolute perfect size. Not just for convenience, but consistency, flavor, aging. Whenever I open up a bottle, I always want to grab for a Magnum, but even I can't put down 2 bottles in a sitting. And I have a belief. I don't keep my bottles. You finish it. There's no point in keeping the bottle. You just finish them. So from an aesthetic perspective, there is nothing more beautiful than these big bottles. When you hold one in your hand, it feels luxurious, it feels elegant, it feels like you are on top of the world. Not only are you drinking, in this case, champagne, but you're drinking it out of the big bottles. You're drinking out of the big boys. So I've got it whittled down to these 2 now. And this is when you really notice the difference. Everyone, when we reach for a standard size bottle, this is it. I mean, this is our bottle of champagne. But I have opened literally thousands of them. And they always feel so wonderful in my hands. Whenever I'm holding a bottle of champagne, it just feels great. But when you have one of the Magnums in your hand, all of a sudden, this becomes what you want your standard to be, and this becomes like one of those little itty bitty sample bottles you get, or little flights you get, and this just all of a sudden goes from the standard to feeling very, very tiny. Once you get bigger than this, and yes, they get much bigger, there are 9 sizes altogether. And once you get into, say, like the Jeroboams and the Balthazars and the giant bottles, what's really happening, unfortunately, is that they're taking Magnums and they're opening them and they're filling up these giant bottles with the contents of the Magnum, further exposing them to oxygen, further exposing them to the air, and hampering their aging potential from that point on. But let's be very honest, anything beyond the Magnum is really for show. There's nothing wrong with it, but those gigantic bottles you see in YouTube or Instagram, the ones where it takes like 2 people to carry them, yeah, those are they're just novelty. They're not something that you would really want to drink as an experience. Opening it and having it being, having pictures taken of you around it, that's what those things are for. So another reason why the Magnum is so awesome is, well, it's 2 bottles in one. And when you are at a social gathering, at a party, and just be honest, it is convenient. It's one less bottle you got to lug around, and believe it or not, there is a bit of a magic about the Magnum. They seem to never end. Whenever I open up a Magnum, they seem to go forever and ever. There's always more champagne in the bottle. It's really strange. And so I only open them when I've got a lot of people or when there's a really special occasion. And that's when I bring out the Magnum. So that's why I have so many of them. And I have many, many more. These are just the ones that can fit on my table. Another important thing about the size of the bottle here, pressure, okay? Champagne bottles, specifically because they have the highest amount of internal pressure amongst all the sparkling wines. These things are glorified bombs. They really are. The amount of pressure that is inside of these bottles is immense. And when you have a bigger bottle, it can contain that pressure better. There's more glass, it's a little bit thicker glass, and it can contain this amount better, allowing you to age and vinify more product. So you would be able to not worry about them exploding, which was a problem. And it's kind of ironic because one of these I'll do a video on this because champagne was something that was originally avoided. People vinifying wine, if they had a bottle that had too much yeast or came in contact with too much yeast or too much sugar and started to ferment into the bottles would explode. And it's a chain reaction, meaning entire racks and entire caves could be damaged because one bottle started to explode and sets off a chain reaction. But the bigger the bottle, the thicker the glass, the more solid, more stable the bottle can be. So that's another reason why the size of the bottle in the Magnum makes a difference. At the end of the day, champagne, sparkling wine, how they're made, how they're aged, how they're fermented, what process they use, these things really matter. It doesn't mean one is truly better than the other. A lot of it does boil down to opinion and a matter of preference. Champagne, I will say, is probably the most complex. Actually, let me rephrase that. Sparkling wines that follow the method traditional, the traditional method, the champagne method, those sparkling wines, they're going to be the most onerous. They're going to be the most difficult, the most challenging, the most hands-on, the most time-consuming. And there's a reason why the method traditional sparkling wines, and champagne specifically, carry a bigger price tag. Again, it has nothing to do with quality. It has to do with your preference. It has to do with champagne is champagne. Champagne just takes it up many, many levels. And, here in the U.S., we've got several really, really good sparkling wines, and they follow the traditional method, and they are magnificent. And we have a lot of the bigger names from Champagne who have invested directly in California sparkling wines, and they follow the method traditional. They are making essentially American champagnes. We can't call them that, but that's really what they are. And more we're seeing the method traditional being followed in the United States, Argentina, Brazil. These areas that are known for quality wine are now following the method traditional. They're growing Meunier, they're growing Pinot Noir, they're growing Chardonnay. They're making them in the traditional manner. They're making them like champagne, aging them properly, putting them under the same conditions, putting them under the same process, picking them by hand, the whole 9 yards of the Scottish reference there. But at the end of the day, grab a bottle, open it up, pour it into a glass, and enjoy it, because that's all these things are meant to be. Enjoyment, meant to make you feel good, to give you a good experience, to brighten your day. And sometimes you need that. And sometimes standard bottle will do it. Every now and then, gotta go with the big boy. I'm Darryl, your champagne expert. Stay bubbly.